I heard the crack at 2:17 a.m., wood splintering in the dead silence like a bone breaking under pressure, and when I checked the live feed on my phone, there she was. Karen, in a leopard print bathrobe and pink Crocs, holding a chainsaw like it was a bouquet of roses at a wedding she wasn't invited to. Now, to truly understand the absurdity of what was unfolding, you need to know two things. First, my cabin is on a private island in the middle of Blue Heron Lake, accessible only by a wooden bridge I built myself over 3 summers and too many cups of coffee. Second, Karen is the self-appointed neighborhood tyrant who believes everything within sight of her binoculars is hers to manage, fix, and fine. And she doesn't like being told no. Especially not by someone who doesn't attend her weekly HOA Harmony Hour meetings. I had moved out to this peaceful spot to escape people like Karen, people who file noise complaints against birds, people who hand out citations for improper gnome placement, and people who once tried to regulate the scent level of backyard grills. But she found me anyway. Her house was across the lake on the opposite bank, about a quarter-mile away. That should have been enough distance. I should have been safe. I even ignored her repeated notes, demands, and passive-aggressive muffins with threats written in icing. It started 6 weeks ago when she showed up at my dock, uninvited, asking if she could use the island for her cousin's sacred feminine wellness retreat. I said no, politely but firmly. She narrowed her eyes like I'd just kicked her golden retriever. "So you're just going to hog nature for yourself?" she snapped, hands on hips, gauzy scarf flapping in the wind like she was about to summon a thunderstorm. After that, the weirdness began. Lawn chairs left near my shoreline. Crystal pyramids arranged in spirals. One time, I found a blessing rock, wrapped in aluminum foil with a sage stick duct taped to it. I knew something was coming, but I didn't expect chainsaw in the moonlight level crazy. That's why I'd installed night vision trail cameras. I positioned them like I was prepping for a National Geographic special. One in the tree canopy, one under the dock, and a particularly sneaky one that looked like a rock with an eyeball. I told myself it was probably overkill. I told myself people like Karen only made threats for drama. I even joked with a buddy over coffee that if she tried anything, I'd have the footage ready for a popcorn and laugh night. But now I was watching the pixels on my phone turn green as Karen, who apparently thought moonlight made her invisible, revved up a gas chainsaw with the confidence of someone cutting into a wedding cake. She was muttering to herself the whole time. The mic didn't catch every word, but I caught spiritually toxic structure, and something about a portal to the male colonizer dimension. With one swing, she nicked the first beam. The bridge shuddered. I felt it in my chest. I'd built that bridge with my own hands, each plank nailed down while dodging mosquitoes and sunburns. Watching her slice through it like it was her personal revenge piñata lit something deep in me I hadn't felt since I walked out of my old tech job and never looked back. She wasn't done. She took out the middle section next, which I'd reinforced last year with recycled steel rods. It took her longer, and she had to stop and chug a Gatorade halfway through. The woman had brought snacks for her sabotage. Who plans a crime like it's a cardio workout? At this point, I wasn't even mad. I was floored. Awed really at the commitment. But also, I wasn't going to stop her. Not yet. I had her. Red-handed. Red-crocheted. Full frontal Karen mode. The last beam gave way with a groan, and the whole middle of the bridge collapsed into the black water. Karen stood there like she'd just performed a ritual, eyes closed, arms lifted, probably waiting for the lake spirits to grant her a condo timeshare on the island. But she'd made 2 mistakes. 1, thinking I didn't have surveillance. And 2, not realizing the cameras were streaming directly to my phone in real time. I already had the footage saved, backed up, and emailed to myself in 3 separate folders before she even picked up the chainsaw again. What she also didn't know is that I hadn't rebuilt that bridge just for access. I'd made it my power line, my water route, my everything. She hadn't just destroyed some boards and bolts, she'd cut off my lifeline. But I wasn't going to call the sheriff. Not yet. Karen thought she'd won. She thought she'd just defeated the evil lone wolf hermit holding the sacred island hostage. What she didn't realize is that I was already planning my response, one that would make her chainsaw session look like a warm-up act. As she disappeared back into the darkness, arms loaded with broken planks as evidence, I hit save on the footage and began sketching out my next move on the back of a pizza box. I wasn't going to repair the bridge. No, I was going to rebuild it into something Karen would never dare to touch again. Something so clever, so dramatic, so undeniably me, it would haunt her every time she passed her front window. Because this wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It was about boundaries, about consequences, and about teaching Karen that just because you can buy a chainsaw doesn't mean you should use it on someone else's sanctuary. Especially not when that someone used to design military-grade surveillance drones for fun. The morning after Karen's chainsaw ballet, the lake was still. My bridge was a wreck, reduced to soggy splinters floating like driftwood memorials in the water. A few planks were still hanging by nails, creaking mournfully with each breeze, like they missed the connection they used to have. I sat on the porch of my island cabin with a thermos of strong coffee and my tablet open, replaying the footage like it was a short film at a petty film festival. And oh, was it award-winning! Karen's every step, every swing, every victory fist pump at the end was captured in full night vision glory, complete with glowing eyes and wild hair. It was half horror movie, half comedy special. I didn't go into town. Not yet. I knew exactly what would happen if I played this right. So I spent the day organizing the footage into clips. One with slow motion, one with zoom-ins, one set to classical music for flair. Then I posted the tamest version, the raw, unedited, fully time-stamped footage, on the community Facebook group, HOA Horrors of Blue Heron Lake. I added a simple caption. Friendly reminder that trespassing and property destruction are still illegal. Featuring a chainsaw, Crocs, and a lot of bad decisions. It was like tossing a raw steak into a pit of starving tigers. Within an hour, the comments exploded. The town, bless its bored little soul, thrives on drama. Karen's name was dropped more times than the mayor's in an election year. People tagged their friends, their cousins, even that one guy who once got into a shouting match with Karen over a parking space and still held a grudge. Some comments were savage. Did she think it was a treehouse invasion? And when your midlife crisis meets a hardware store sale. Someone even turned her chainsaw pose into a meme. I didn't create the chaos. I just lit the match. Predictably, Karen tried to fight back. By afternoon, she had posted a 10-paragraph screed in the group, claiming that the bridge was a public safety hazard and she was simply performing a preventative community intervention. She used phrases like spiritual cleansing and environmental duty, and accused me of hoarding sacred land. She even tried to pivot it into a wellness cause, saying the bridge had been blocking positive lake energy. It was like listening to someone try to justify stealing your car because it wasn't aligned with the sun. But the town wasn't buying it. Especially not when I posted the second camera angle, full daylight quality footage from across the lake, showing her approach, her mutterings, and the dramatic kick she gave the last plank like she was ending a wrestling match. At that point, she went quiet online. Which, in Karen language, meant she was plotting offline. Sure enough, the very next day, I received an envelope in my island mailbox, delivered by drone, thank you very much, with a formal letter inside. It was a printed accusation from Karen claiming I had threatened her with verbal harassment via bridge signage. I blinked. The only sign I had on the bridge had been a tiny wooden plaque that read, "Private property, please don't be weird." Hardly a threat. She included a photo of the plaque, zoomed in dramatically, with the word "weird" circled in red marker like it was a slur. I laughed. But not for long. Because the kicker came in the form of a forged eviction notice she'd claimed I mailed to her. Sloppy Photoshop job, but the sheriff's office had to investigate it. Karen had walked into the station holding the paper and claimed I was mentally unstable and had threatened to sink her boat with mind energy. Thankfully, Sheriff Dewey had known me for years and didn't bat an eye. He called me from his office, asked if I'd been hexing pontoon boats lately, and then invited me in for coffee. When I arrived, I brought my laptop and showed him everything. The videos, the posts, the note, even the burnt Gatorade bottle I'd retrieved from the lake, with Karen's name half melted into the plastic. Dewey chuckled through most of it, but when I got to the part about the forged letter, his face went stone serious. "This here," he said, tapping the screen, "is what we call mail fraud. And she's got no idea how big a federal mess that can turn into." Meanwhile, Karen hadn't slowed down. She started a new initiative, one only her and 2 other equally bitter HOA members supported. She called it the Civic Responsibility Task Force and printed flyers accusing me of hoarding emergency resources and dismantling community harmony through weaponized solitude. The flyers featured a cartoon drawing of me looking like a swamp goblin holding an axe. I had to admit the artwork was good. She plastered them around town, at the grocery store, at the post office, even slipped one into my cabin door via kayak, which was impressive given her well-documented fear of deep water. It didn't matter. The town wasn't on her side anymore. People saw the footage. They saw the drama. And they'd had enough of her community cleansing. A few folks even showed up at my dock one morning with a box of donuts and a bottle of whiskey as a thank you offering. One guy said, "We always wanted to see her get hers. Didn't know you'd film it like a National Geographic special." But Karen wasn't finished. Her latest trick was trying to claim that the lake was public domain, and my island was technically federal land. She cited a bizarre blog about maritime law and tried to present it at an HOA meeting like she was arguing in front of the Supreme Court. It was glorious, especially when someone fact-checked her mid-sentence, and she responded by storming out, declaring she would escalate this to higher dimensions. I just kept sipping my coffee and making plans. I wasn't going to get dragged into her chaos. Not yet. She thought she was playing chess, but she didn't realize I'd already built the entire board. The footage was archived. The legal angles were covered. The bridge was gone, yes, but now it was an opportunity. I was going to rebuild it, but not just as a bridge. As a message. Karen had made a show of tearing it down. I was going to make a spectacle out of rebuilding it. And every board I laid, every beam I hammered, would echo with the sound of consequences. She thought she was the star of the show, but all she'd really done was give me the opening scene of something much, much bigger. I didn't waste a minute once I decided to rebuild the bridge. But this time, it wasn't just about reconnecting the island to the mainland. This time, it was personal. Karen had made it a battle, and I intended to win, not by throwing punches, but by constructing something so hilariously over-engineered that even the squirrels would stop and applaud. I started sketching out plans, and within a few days, lumber and supplies were being ferried in by boat. Word spread fast, as it always did around here. People thought I was just rebuilding the bridge. I let them think that. What I didn't share was what the new bridge was hiding. By the end of the first week, the main frame was up. From a distance, it looked like a typical sturdy footbridge. But woven into the structure were hidden motion sensors, solar-powered lights, and, yes, a voice-activated scarecrow I dubbed Frank. Frank stood in the middle of the bridge wearing a cowboy hat and overalls, and whenever someone stepped on the bridge uninvited, he would spin around, point with one gloved finger, and yell, "Private property! Turn around, Susan." I tested it a few times myself, nearly spilling my coffee the first time Frank shouted at me. Worth every second of setup. The motion sensors were hooked up to sprinklers camouflaged among the railings. They wouldn't hurt anyone, but if triggered, they'd unleash a cold blast of lake water, enough to soak even the most stubborn trespasser. I wasn't trying to hurt Karen. I was trying to humiliate her. There's a difference. I figured if she wanted drama, I'd hand her a whole Broadway show. Sure enough, she couldn't resist. 2 days after I installed Frank and finished the final planks, Karen made her move. It was just after dusk, and I was on the island with a pair of binoculars, watching from behind a tree like I was on safari. Karen emerged from the trees near the mainland edge, dragging behind her a makeshift raft made of paddleboards tied together with bungee cords and yoga mat. She wore a headlamp, a reflective vest, and what I could only describe as war paint made of sunscreen. This was not a woman backing down. She dragged her floating contraption to the water and shoved off. The whole thing looked about as stable as a marshmallow on a toothpick. But she made it halfway across the lake before disaster struck. A duck flew too close, startled her, and she fell sideways into the water with a splash loud enough to wake the fish. I watched as she flailed, one paddleboard drifting away, her headlamp blinking like a dying firefly. She made it to shore eventually, soaked and sputtering, and staggered toward the bridge. That's when the sensors kicked in. Frank spun around like a cowboy possessed and yelled, "Turn around, Susan!" Karen screamed, slipped, and activated the sprinklers. A powerful jet of water blasted her directly in the face, and she went down hard onto the mud, screaming something about civil liberties and spiritual warfare. I could have helped her. I didn't. I stayed behind the tree, biting down on my hand to keep from laughing too loudly. Eventually, she stumbled away, dripping wet and howling like a gremlin caught in the rain. Frank, ever loyal, shouted at her retreating back, "Last warning, ma'am." The next morning, I paid a visit to Sheriff Dewey. I brought him coffee and a fresh copy of the footage. He was already sipping from a mug that said, "World's okayest sheriff," and smirking before I even spoke. "She tried to build a floating bridge with yoga mats?" he asked, setting the mug down. "She's persistent," I said. He leaned back and scratched his chin. "You want to press charges yet?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's see what else she's got in her." He chuckled and shook his head. "Just don't let her drown. Can't make promises. But the duck's got her number." We both laughed, and I left feeling good. The footage had already made its way into another round of community gossip. Someone turned Karen's mud-soaked photo into a motivational poster with the words "persistence," when you're too stubborn to quit and too proud to learn. A few people dropped by the dock to compliment my scarecrow. One guy even offered to install a second one on his lawn. But Karen, of course, wasn't done. At the next HOA meeting, she came in hot, sopping wet shoes, frizzy hair, and a manila folder of evidence. She claimed I was operating a military surveillance site and accused me of psychological warfare against a civilian population. I watched the livestream from my island porch, sipping tea and snacking on popcorn. It was better than anything on Netflix. She presented diagrams of the bridge's wiring, screenshots of Frank in midspin, and one wildly inaccurate diagram that labeled my propane tank as a potential mind control transmitter. The room was dead silent. Then someone snorted. Then someone laughed. And then the floodgates opened. One HOA board member stood up and asked, very seriously, if Karen had been mixing NyQuil with Red Bull again. But the real surprise came when another board member, Dolores, pulled out a folder of her own. She had receipts. Literal receipt. Karen, it turned out, had been negotiating with an influencer to rent the island for a retreat center she claimed she had access to. She'd even accepted a deposit. The influencer had backed out when they saw the footage of Karen being blasted by sprinklers and yelled at by a talking scarecrow. The room erupted. Karen went red in the face, started shouting about conspiracies and sacred contracts, and stormed out. The board voted then and there to remove her from her position, 3-2. One abstention. It was beautiful. She didn't speak to anyone for a week after that. But I knew she wasn't gone. Karen never gives up. She retreats, regroups, and comes back louder. I stayed ready. I added a second scarecrow, upgraded the sensors. I even wired the bridge to trigger a fog machine if someone lingered too long, just for dramatic flair. I'd won the battle, sure. But I could still feel it in my bones. Karen had one more move up her sleeve. And when it came, it would be wild. Because for Karen, humiliation doesn't mean surrender. It means escalation. And this time, I was more than ready. I was looking forward to it. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day where the sun seemed a little too smug and the breeze a little too quiet, like the world knew something was about to go down. I was back on the island, sipping iced tea and adding solar-powered fairy lights to the new bridge railing, mostly for aesthetics but also because Karen hated anything whimsical she hadn't personally approved. I hadn't heard a peep from her in over a week since her public meltdown at the HOA meeting. It was suspicious. Karen doesn't just vanish. She lies low the way a raccoon does when it's planning something nasty and knows the trash can's locked. Around noon, I got a ping on my security system. The motion sensors on the north shoreline triggered, followed by a low-pitched alert from the bridge's midpoint. At first, I thought it was just a curious deer. But then the camera feed opened, and there she was. Karen, soaking wet again, hair matted to her face, limping along the shore with a walking stick and what looked like a neck brace made out of a folded yoga mat. This time, she wasn't trying to cross the bridge or paddle across the lake. She was staging something. She turned toward the camera and suddenly collapsed, landing on the muddy edge of my property with the kind of theatrical flair usually reserved for fainting goat. Then she started screaming. Not yelling. Screaming. Words like assault, inhumane conditions, and chemical attack. I watched, dumbfounded, as she clutched her ankle and held up a piece of driftwood like it was a medical exhibit. It was then I noticed the camera she had placed across the water. She wasn't just faking an injury. She was recording a full-blown news segment. Minutes later, a local news van showed up on the opposite bank, along with a reporter and a cameraman. Karen waved frantically, then began wailing to the sky, claiming I had booby-trapped the shoreline and that she'd been lured into a citizen's death trap disguised as a footpath. She said the lights on the bridge were disorienting and caused her to lose balance. She told the reporter she feared for her life, and that I had used psychological torment to drive her into a trauma spiral. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to flip the script completely. Villain turned victim, complete with prop. But here's the thing about recording everything, it works both ways. I pulled up the full camera footage from two angles. One from the bridge, one from a drone that had been doing a lazy circle around the island and saw the whole setup. Karen had rehearsed the fall 3 separate times before going live. She'd even thrown the driftwood in place beforehand to make it look like she tripped on it. There was audio of her whispering, "Okay, take 4, let's go big," right before the final tumble. It was so ridiculous I almost felt bad. The news crew packed up eventually, clearly unsure of how much of Karen's story to take seriously. The cameraman, bless him, had seen enough. He wandered over to my side later that day and asked if I wanted to give a counterstatement. I invited him up to the porch and handed him a flash drive with the footage. He laughed so hard he choked on his soda and promised to make sure the truth found daylight. Karen had no idea, but the whole town was already turning her latest stunt into legend. Still, she wasn't done. That weekend, she filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming my island was technically within a wildlife protection corridor, and that my presence was interfering with regional bird migration patterns. She even tried to get the environmental board involved, sending them a 5-page letter filled with hand-drawn maps, fake bird counts, and a diagram of the bridge labeled Avian Anxiety Zone. The head of the board, who'd known me for years, called me laughing and asked if I'd recently installed a hawk repellent system. I told him the only thing getting repelled out here was nonsense. Karen was spiraling. Her final gambit came in the form of a lawsuit. She filed it herself, no lawyer would touch it, and accused me of psychological bullying through excessive architectural expression. That was the actual phrasing. Her evidence included photos of the scarecrow yelling, the fog machine activating, and a screen grab of the bridge's fairy lights. She claimed I had weaponized design and emotional manipulation. The judge took one look at the paperwork and scheduled a dismissal hearing with the urgency of a man flipping through spam mail. I showed up to court in jeans and a flannel. Karen came in with a neck brace, sunglasses, and a manila envelope bursting with laminated grievances. She opened with a dramatic monologue about justice, community suffering, and the dark side of creative carpentry. The judge nodded, listened, then asked her one question. "Do you have any evidence that the defendant intended to harm you?" Karen pointed at a photo of the scarecrow. The judge blinked slowly, looked at me, then back at her. "That's a stuffed doll in a cowboy hat." "It spoke," she said, trembling with what she thought was righteous fury. The judge dismissed the case 5 minutes later. On the way out, I held the door open for her. She didn't say a word. Back at the island, I took a deep breath and exhaled. The bridge stood strong, the lights twinkled, and the lake was quiet again. The ducks had returned. The island felt peaceful, like it was finally shaking off the nonsense. I added a final touch to the bridge, a plaque at the entrance that read, "Built better after the chainsaw." A few days later, I found a note in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a $50 gift card to the local hardware store and a handwritten message. "Thank you for standing up to her. We were too scared for too long. P.S. Frank is a legend." I smiled. It didn't matter who had sent it. What mattered was that people were starting to push back. Karen wasn't just my problem anymore. She was everyone's headache. And finally, collectively, we were done letting her run the show. Now, whenever someone walks the bridge, Frank still spins and yells. But he's got a new line now, programmed just for special occasions. "If you linger too long," he says, "this is not a spiritual vortex. Move along." Karen still lives across the lake. I see her curtains twitch sometimes. I know she's watching. But she doesn't come near anymore. Not after the cameras. Not after the bridge. Not after learning that no matter how hard she tries to destroy something, sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction at all. It's rebuilding it better. Louder, brighter, and with enough security to keep even the most determined chaos in check. The bridge still stands. And now, so do I.